Well, welcome back to the Waiting Well podcast. I am so excited for our episode Back in Action Post Baby. I have Rachel Cruze from the Ramsey Show, best-selling author, to join us today and have a conversation about navigating the waiting season and infertility and trying to conceive that desire for a baby alongside financial stewardship. What does the Bible say about that? And that's something that Josh and I have been super passionate about since we got married. I was actually telling Rachel before we hopped on, before we got married, I did their Financial Peace University class. If you have never heard of it or have never done it before, highly, highly recommend. And we have lived our married life according to those principles that are introduced in those lessons. And so with Rachel today, I really wanted to have a conversation about how do you navigate that desire for a baby when you might be in a really difficult financial position? How do you make difficult decisions of, we want a baby, we're not getting any younger, but also there's some finances at play here. So we're going to go ahead and dive on in.
Hey friends, welcome to the Waiting Well podcast. I am your host, Courtney Dunker, and you are here because your journey to motherhood has not looked the way that you always imagined. It has held heartbreak, loneliness, and questions like, why me, God? I'm here to remind you that you do not have to walk this road alone. And here we can wait well together. Each week, I will share faith-based encouragement from my own infertility journey, provide information from guest experts on navigating infertility and conceiving, powerful testimonies, and top tips on stewarding your health and emotional well-being through this demanding journey. So if you are ready to take back control of your life, find peace with God, join the in-between spaces, and thrive in your waiting season, then meet me at the well, girl. Grab that warm chocolate chip cookie, a little bit of unicorn juice or iced coffee. We've got some intentional growth to do. Let's get it.
Rachel, would you like to start with just kind of sharing how to look at those financial decisions from a biblical perspective, but knowing that, with desiring a baby, that's such an emotional thing. How do we start? Where do we start when, as a couple, you're looking at possibly fertility treatments that could cost quite a bit?
Yes. Well, thanks, Courtney. Thanks for having me. I so appreciate it. And, this is such a sensitive topic. And as I was coming on this podcast, even as we were kind of talking before the recording, I was like, man, this is not talking about what 401k to pick or what house even, right? I mean, a house is an emotional decision, probably one of the more emotional ones for people. This is talking about your family and your children and your desire to be a mom. So I'm like, the emotional scale is magnified 10x as we have this conversation. And I want to make sure that I'm as grace forward too with it, because I never had a story of this. I've had close friends, and it make me emotional talking about it. I gave one of my friends her shot. It's like we were on a trip one time, so it's such a grueling time. And I think especially for women, and it's heartbreaking. And so when you talk about that emotional side, it is so easy for that to go right into our money. And it's really easy for our emotions to take over our finances. And what's hard about money is yes, there is math in play. And, you can look at the math side of money, which is very important. But so much of our money choices and decisions around money, regardless of infertility or not, are driven by emotion. It's driven by this level of, oh, I want to keep up, or I want this, I want that. I'm bored, so I'm going to buy something to excite me. So much of our decisions can be persuaded by our emotions. So again, as we said earlier, this is 10x it because we're talking about our kids and the future family that we want. And it's, and it's just not happening. And so, every time I do go back to what does scripture say around these principles of money? And one of those principles is debt. And every time scripture mentions debt, it is in a negative fashion. Now, it is not a sin. It is not a salvation issue. So if you have a personal loan or a credit card or a student loan, you're not going to hell. I don't believe that, right? You are fine. It is not a salvation issue. You can still go to heaven. But what is wise? And I think that's one of the guardrails to look at, because when you take on debts, you are taking on a level of risk. And what we're finding in studies now is you're taking over a level of your emotional and spiritual well-being. I mean, even the loss of sleep at night that occurs when debt is in the picture. And so it just adds a layer of risk and emotional stress. And so you layer that on with an emotional process like infertility, and it can almost double it in a sense, right? And so in one end is an easy road to go down to get the funds you need to get obviously this wonderful desire that you want. And there's a part of me that I'm like, I get it. Like, I totally get why that would be it. But I think what ends up happening is on the other side at times, it ends up becoming more of that burden that is not expected. And so that's kind of the warning flag that I would raise with it. And again, it's a difficult topic, but what does it look like? And I would do the math, for somebody if they were to say, okay, here's what the treatments are going to cost. Okay, let's look at a solution. What if debt was not on the table and it's almost a black and white issue? What if we just didn't even have that as an option? What are our options now? What does it look like? Is it taking on an extra job? Is it cutting some expenses here? Is it maybe not taking that trip there? What does that look like? And so again, I think looking at the options at times can even bring peace because it's bringing facts to the middle of a really emotional subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I don't think people realize is that there is no guarantee even with the fertility treatments, right? So that was something we looked at is like, would we be okay basically taking this money and kind of lighting it on fire in a sense of saying,
yeah,
because we did have Josh and I did have the cash to pay for IVF when we made that decision, but it was still a difficult decision because it would delay other things, right? Like if you're buying a home or you need a new car, whatever it might be.
yes.
So it's even beyond the debt aspect too, but knowing that I've talked to some women over the years who have taken out loans and have that payment with nothing to show for it afterwards, there isn't a guarantee that that money equals having the baby that you desire, right? So then you think of that burden beyond it, and it's exactly what you're talking about. Like, have we assessed that risk, beyond it? But I love what you mentioned about taking off debt completely, because it's kind of like in marriage. It's like, if divorce is not an option, how are we going to navigate this conversation?
Right.
So
Yes.
I feel like that's kind of a healthy mindset to go into it with. So for those that, kind of, you have obviously different people in different categories where maybe like, okay, we don't have the money at all, or we have some money, whatnot. How would you encourage them to navigate those conversations between the two of them from a healthy perspective and just looking at, like, you kind of mentioned exploring their options. Do you have any tips on that of like, would you recommend saving, over time, or what would you recommend to them if they're like, okay, we do want a baby. We've been told basically fertility treatments are our only option.
Yep.
How do we close that gap?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it would be number one, looking at the numbers of where you're currently at. And so to say, okay, what does our lifestyle look like now? Are there obvious places that maybe we can cut? And even cutting, $300, $400, $500 a month can be a huge jumpstart to some people. And again, it may be sacrifice, saying, okay, we're not gonna be able to do this, but we're saving to do that. And I would play that out and say, okay, how many months would it take to do that? Now let's just add an extra job. And let's just say we brought in an extra $1,000 a month. Okay, those together, what is that going to add up to? And then even shop around it. And I hate to say this, I'm so ignorant on the subject. So all of you listening are much more experts on this than I am. But, even shopping around different clinics and different doctors and different treatment options. And hey, what are the price points here? Because I would have to assume, just like anything in the medical world, one may be more expensive than another, right? Another doctor may be more expensive than something else. Like, is there even a research on the price of the actual treatment? And I would do that. I would look and see in that way. But yes, I mean, I think the easiest way to save, and this would be for anything that you're saving for, it is to cut expenses and to up income. And one of the best things you can do always, again, as we said, in emotional times in general, is to have facts. Facts are your friends. So like literally take out a sheet of paper and write it down, and write a calendar and be like, okay, and write numbers down and say, these are our goals to hit every single month because this is the end date. Because we don't want to live in this forever, right? This doesn't want to be something that we're doing until we're 70 years old. These cuts from our lifestyle or working extra, but we're doing it for a purpose and we're doing it for a goal. And here it is. And what's amazing too is so much of money is so emotionally driven that when you are motivated by something, and this is an incredible motivator to save, I actually find that people end up saving faster. Or, I can even mirror getting out of debt. People get out of debt and they end up doing it in a faster time than they even expected because they got an extra raise at work, or they ended up taking on more hours because they could just see that finish line. So it is amazing the progress that happens in your habits that change for the positive when you do have a goal.
Yeah, I love those tips. And something that I was actually just thinking of as you were sharing those tips was with IVF and just the different processes. I obviously did IVF, so I'm most familiar with that. We did do some other stuff, but we actually, like, you can kind of break up the process. So like you can do, maybe it's like, okay, we pay for the egg retrieval, and that's kind of the whole, we start there. And it's like, how can you break up the cost? So like maybe it does take you a year to go through the whole cycle, but you're doing it in, bite-sized chunks that like honor those finances. And so with, kind of with that, like, I know that you've obviously written some beautiful children's books. You sent me one of them, and Highland, my daughter, was so excited to read it. She was like pointing out all the animals, and it was just the cutest thing. But kind of I think the main principle is still applicable here, like really harnessing gratitude when you're in a waiting season, or even just in a season where you're like, I don't have what I want. Can you share some thoughts to that, and what we can be encouraged by when we're like, gosh, okay, I'm looking at the facts and this just it's not adding up quite the way that I want. And how can I pursue that gratitude, in this season as I'm waiting and seeing?
Yes. So that first kid's book, I think the one that you have is I'm Glad for What I Have. And it is this message of contentment. And then my second one is coming out here in just a few weeks, and it's I'm Glad for Where I Am. And that's the gratitude one. And when I wrote that, it's so interesting we're talking about the subject, because a journey I've been on with gratitude is I'm like, I want to start with this basis of what I am grateful for and end up really where my identity lies and who I am. It can't be something that can be taken away. And I think, on a shallow end, it's, our houses and cars and what we wear, our clothes, like, yes, I want to be grateful for that, but that's not where I want to place my deep identity. And then you go down to a deeper layer, and then you do put on these roles of a mom and a wife. And sadly, our broken world, like, that role can be taken away in a physical sense. And so then that causes you to dig even deeper. And where does that deep, deep identity lie? And it is a deep belonging that who I am as a child of God. And that's the first step in that identity process, and ultimately in that gratitude. And when I can start there, then everything else builds upon that. But I think we so easily can start on that outside shell. And even, have a banner in a great way. I'm a wife, and it's a beautiful thing and it's great. That may not be my story forever and ever. I mean, I pray it is. I pray we grow old and we both die on the Titanic together or whatever, like that scene with the old couple, right? Like that would be ideal. But I don't know. I don't know what story is written. And so there is something in these roles that are beautiful roles, and ones that we all, I think, a lot of people long for, like a mom and a wife. But even deeper than that, like, what is the thing that can't be shaken? And I think putting a level of focus on that has been really important for me in this season. So that identity piece, that who I am, where I'm putting my identity, I don't want it to be in something that can be taken away, and starting at that point. And that gratitude comes out of that I'm thankful for that middle core of the shell, like that is who I am. And then out of this, I can look for other things and to be grateful for, but that's where it starts.
That's beautiful. And that's really, I think, so much of what I tell people. I came to peace before God had ever answered that question of, are we ever going to be parents? Am I ever going to be a mom? I really came to a place of peace of like, it is okay even if he doesn't answer that prayer. And it took me years, because we tried for 6 years before we had Highland. And so I would say like year 3 or 4 was when I felt like finally got broken enough where I was like, okay, I get that the only thing promised was my salvation. Like that, a relationship with him is what I was promised and guaranteed. I wasn't guaranteed a comfortable or happy or, even the desires of my heart. Like so many people are like, chase whatever makes you happy, all those things. It's like, that's not what the Bible says though, So as you have gone on that personal journey yourself, are there things that you have implemented on a daily routine or just little small things that have helped you kind of dig that hole of like, this is where I'm living out of, that people listening can maybe start implementing to help build that? Because I do think there's an element of like infertility where we want that so bad that we can't, it's sometimes hard to shift the perspective back to like, this is my identity, period. No more comma. like if God does X, Y, and Z, I'll love him or he's good or whatever. We fill in those blanks. So what has helped you cultivate that daily?
I was going to say therapy, but I'm not in therapy daily. I probably should be. But truly, I think there's a level of self-work that is really important, especially in times of suffering. And I think when there's times of suffering, you're primed. I think your soul is primed to get there so much faster because there is a level of comfort when you are getting what you want in a sense, and you can kind of like live your life. But it's in those times of deep suffering that I think the beauty comes out of. And I think you're able then, and truly, I laughed about therapy, but if you can bring somebody along this journey with you, and maybe it's a wise friend, maybe it is actually a trained counselor or therapist, because there's grief in suffering. Regardless of the suffering, there is a grief of what I thought is not anymore. And walking through a proper level of suffering of, man, these were my desires and they're not being met, or this happened and that is not what I planned for, is a really beautiful thing. And I think out of that, we do see renewal if we choose that path, because I do see people in life. And again, I'm scared to even put this out into the world because I'm like, I'm not even sure if Rachel in 6 months would agree with me here. But I do think there's a level of our work in it that's really important, because I think things can happen in our lives. And some people take it as a victim badge of honor and they don't grow from it. And they either just fix it by sweeping under the rug and just trying to move on, or they sit in it forever and ever and amen, and it becomes who they are, versus saying, okay, I want to take this and I'm going to sit in the suffering. That doesn't mean I get to leave it, but how can I grow out of this? And I think that's where Jesus comes in. I really do, because I think that's what he did. He walked and was with people that were suffering. I mean, the woman at the well, he brought out her suffering when he said, I can give you living water. She's like, I want the living water. And we're like, great, salvation, perfect. And he said, go get your husband. And you're like, what? Like that. That's so mean of him to do, but he went to her suffering, like that's what he does. And so that's what I would encourage people is that's where I think he does some of his most beautiful work is in it. So, and again, and this specific suffering of infertility was not my story, but I've had other sufferings in the last, few years that I've had to work through, and it's been hard. But I would say do that work, like do that soul work, because I think it doesn't necessarily make it easier, but there's a purpose in it. And you find that purpose in it.
It's so good. And I just think it speaks because, whether it's infertility or something else, like suffering is universal. It's something we all experience at some level. And that helped shift my perspective of like jealousy and bitterness of other people, because I was like, well, maybe this is my suffering, but I don't know what suffering they are going through or what they will go through or, and just kind of like what we touched on earlier, when we desire kids or we desire to be a wife or all the, whatever that's deeper in us besides the shallow things, those things can also be taken away. Like, even though I did get pregnant and have a baby, like that is I don't know the days that God has for her on this earth. Right. So it's like, if we can't learn to go there now before he does the miracle or before he answers that prayer, like, how much more difficult will it be when we're holding that possession or thing that we so deeply desire, but we have no control over the story that's being written, right? So anyway, I love that component of just really it's kind of like the newborn season right now where I'm in. It's like another mom was like, the only way through is just keep on going through.
Just keep day after day, just one foot in front of the other.
Yes.
Right.
So it's like a similar journey when you're going through that grief and suffering. Is like, sometimes you just have to grind through it, and do that work in the middle of it so that you can be on the other side experiencing that peace. So final kind of wrap up question. When you're making decisions about growing your family, like obviously a lot of our listeners are in their waiting season for becoming parents, but now me and Josh are on the other side and we're like, okay, it took us so long to have kids, but now we have two and we're like, could we do more? And then we feel weird about saying like, well, we're just going to limit it here when it was such a huge prayer for so long. Financially, like how much of a role does finances play in making those decisions? What would you recommend? Like, whether it's fertility treatments, whatever, how big of a factor is it?
Yeah, I think it's becoming a bigger one because I think more and more people are just struggling in general. There's a lot of people still like living paycheck to paycheck. inflation, even if you're trying to buy a house, the interest rates, I mean, all of it. There's a lot that feels like our backs are against the wall and like life is just happening to us when it comes to our money. So I do think that there is a real role that all this plays. And so that's where I always go back. We kind of said it earlier, but it's just true that facts are your friends. And so to be able to map out and just say, okay, here's what we have, because the math, it's not emotional, right? We're the emotional ones. The math's not emotional. And so to really make it a priority to say, okay, here's what we make every month. What are we going to do with that? And that is going to look different if we have 7 kids. It's going to look different if we don't have kids. It's going to look different if we're saving up for something. It's going to look different if we're not. And we're in a season of just kind of getting by month to month, right? So your season of life will look different with what you do with your paycheck. But I think the goal is to say, hey, we're going to be purposeful with the money that hits our account. And so the more kids, you have, as you were saying before this recording, even you're like, oh my gosh, because there's expenses with it. And so being able to plan that as much as you can, stuff is always going to pop up, right? So there's a lot of grace in this. And like, you really don't know until you're in it and it's month to month and you're like, okay, this is where we're at. But as much as you can plan and even just do a budget and say, hey, we're going to take some categories of our life. We're going to be purposeful with where we spend on each of these. And we have a stopping point, right? Like we're not going to spend more than we make, and you kind of have these sets of principles that guide you, I think is really important, regardless of what season you're in. But that is something that's going to really help you be grounded in the day-to-day when it comes to your money.
I love and I hate that at the same time, because it's like the math is math. We want to be emotional, but if it's not mathing, then it's like, it's not fair, So I think that's a beautiful principle to live by, hard to do, as I'm sure that's why you are in the business you're in, because it's so hard. But no, I love that. I think that's really valuable advice, especially just really honoring God in each aspect, because I do believe that part of family stewardship is the financial aspect of it, right? Like your family is directly impacted when we aren't financially stewarding things well. So thank you so much for all of your wisdom and all of just the little nuggets that you were sharing about your personal journey and sharing the gratitude that we can have in the season that we're in before God does anything beyond that, and the financial tips of just kind of looking at it from a different lens, and the reminder to remove the emotion, as hard as it may be, to really be intentional to kind of remove that emotion, set it aside, have different conversations that maybe are not being had yet to bless your family. And if you guys would like to grab her books for either just family members, yourself, have it in your bookshelf for when your baby comes, you can go ahead and grab that. Is it available on Amazon right now? The second one?
It is.
Okay.
The second one will be out mid-April.
Mid-April. Okay.
Yes.
I'm so excited for that. And your first one is currently out, available on Amazon. And I can link that below.
Yes, that would be great.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for your time today and sharing with us. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Courtney.
I am so glad that you chose to meet me at the well today. If this episode inspired you, changed you, or blessed you in some way, I would love for you to do one of 2 things. First, head to Apple Podcasts at that link below and leave a review. And second, screenshot this episode and share it in your stories, tagging me at Sown with Strength, or text it on over to a friend that this episode might bless. These are the number 1 ways to thank me. I am truly so grateful to be building out this community, and I cannot wait to see you on the next episode. Until then, go get a workout done for me, and I will see you right back here at the Waiting Well podcast.